Another way to represent what we would otherwise present in person during an open house format. If we were doing this in person and not virtually, we would have some display boards that would be highlighting the key recommendations of the comprehensive plan, where people could drop by at their convenience. The planning team would be there to field questions, and then people could ask questions on the spot or leave a comment form, fill out a comment form to leave behind. Since we've been doing everything virtually for, of course, obvious reasons during this process. Instead, what I'm going to do is walk you through what otherwise would be available as posters. The information that we're sharing is going to be available on the project website so that you can have more time to digest everything and also provide comment if you don't feel comfortable doing so today. We have about another week where we would welcome you to review the materials that are going to be presented today, and then feel free to offer any comments as we continue to finesse the draft comprehensive plan. For anyone who is new to the process, very simply, a comprehensive plan, you'll hear me refer repeatedly to it as a comp plan. It is a policy document that guides decisions related to land use and development, and it's updated every 5 years. And so what I am intending to do to help share with you the highlights of the draft plan is to break the presentation into two parts. It's really sharing the core elements. What are the recommended action items to implement this plan over the next 5 years in what's going to be called a short-term work program? It's the to-do list. Moving forward, what are those actions that the city can undertake addressing a variety of topics that one way or another relate to land use, development, design, growth, specifically historic and natural resources, housing, economic development, community facilities and services, and transportation. You'll note that the slides are going to be broken down by these topics, and if you see a check mark, that's to let you know the type of actions that the city has already undertaken relative to that topic, relative to historic preservation, for example, whether it was an item that was recommended in the last plan that's currently in effect and was updated in 2016. It may be something that wasn't recommended in the plan, but it's another initiative that the city has already undertaken. And then if you see an arrow, then that means those are those things that we're saying are recommended in this 5-year plan update, the 2021 plan as an update to the 2016 plan. And then coming back to land use, since that's not one of the topics explicitly mentioned under number 1 above, that's because that's going to be in the second half of the presentation where I'll be presenting the draft future development map and character area descriptions. In past, it may have been called the future land use map or character area map, but the map is used on a day-to-day basis. Whenever there is a rezoning application, then city council, staff and city council and the applicant is mindful of what the future development recommends in terms of appropriate land uses. And when we talk about character area descriptions, each of every parcel in the city falls within a recommended character area on the future development map. And the character area, in addition to identifying appropriate land uses, also is an opportunity to explain a little bit more about desired design or development, supporting zoning districts that implement the character area. So you'll see all that laid out. So as I mentioned, these are the core components of the plan converted into a PowerPoint. But of course, there's going to be a complete draft document that pulls all of these pieces together and fleshes it out in a draft. As I said, draft being the point because nothing is final yet, but it will more fully describe what we call the community's vision for growth and development. So just as you're here today as a means to be made aware of where we are and to let us share with you the working draft recommendations for the plan, wanted to just offer a reminder of how we've been making the public aware of the fact that there's a comp plan and that there's an opportunity to provide input. Because the point being, the basis for many of the recommendations that you're seeing today are based on what we've heard in the community, based on what we've heard from comments left on the interactive website, on the online survey. We had an earlier virtual meeting like this earlier in the year. This is the second and final virtual meeting. And after today, as I said earlier, we'll have about a week for everyone to review these materials, provide comments if you have them. And then we'll be moving forward towards the final step of having a public hearing, which is another opportunity to provide comment on the full draft document before it is transmitted to the state, which is a part of the required process. The state must review it before it can be adopted this summer. So those preliminaries done, let me jump in. Okay, so topic number 1, historic preservation. Proposed action items, first of all, the check marks. I just want to give a little bit of background related to historic resource protection. The city has had a long-standing local historic district, the Flowery Branch Historic District, shown in blue. Its designation means that any building or property that's within it is subject to design review by a historic preservation commission. So any new development, any alterations to buildings, any proposed signs to commercial buildings, everything must be reviewed. So those elements have been in place for some time. Also, just as far as some current projects, the historic caboose and depot, the city has recently been making some repairs, as well as to some city-owned buildings on Main Street in the Old Town area. So looking ahead, what we're recommending is to update the citywide historic resources survey. There was a survey that was last conducted in 2003, and that's why you see all of the dots on the map here. That was based on the survey to break down or to identify the age of buildings in the area. Because it has so much age, there have been changing conditions. Since the last survey was conducted, there may be buildings that have been lost. There may be buildings that now qualify as historic. Regardless, it's useful in understanding the age and conditions of buildings that are in and around the downtown area. Secondly, we recommend codifying or adopting as code some general historic district design guidelines that are in the current 2016 comp plan. They're fairly general, but rather than be maintained within the policy document, it's important to go ahead and make sure that they're rolled into the zoning ordinance. So they are firm, and they would be used in conjunction with the historic district design, sign guidelines that are already adopted to assist the Historic Preservation Commission in making decisions with proposed design of new buildings or changes to existing buildings. But as a second step to that, we recommend that a true standalone tailored historic district design guidelines, a document that be prepared unique to Flowery Branch and the properties that are regulated in the local historic district, be developed rather than just relying on the more general guidelines that are currently in place. Okay, there's a lot here on natural resources. There are a lot of ordinances that are in place that, thus all the check marks that indicate that the city has adopted them and they're being enforced. with respect to protecting natural resources in the course of development. What we're recommending with this comp plan update is to adopt 2 additional ordinances regarding the protection of water supply watershed and groundwater recharge protection areas. The map that you see is intended to depict the location of certain natural resources, including the sort of the gold color hatch marks, south part of the city near Sterling on the Lake. That's a groundwater recharge area. And then the blue hash marks on the west side of 985 delineate a large water supply watershed. And within that, any perennial stream segments are intended to have enhanced buffers to ensure the protection of the water quality. And so that was what would be achieved by adopting the water supply watershed protection ordinance, as well as having standards in the groundwater recharge protection area that in essence say if there's a house to be developed with a septic system, it has to have a larger lot size. These 2 ordinances are brought to us by the state. They require communities, when updating their comp plans, to look at the sensitive natural areas. And if ordinances are not in place to help towards their protection, then it's incumbent on communities to make sure that there are protections moving forward, thus the need to have the adoption of these 2 new ordinances. In addition, just related to conservation in general, there's an existing tree ordinance, but we recommend it be strengthened with respect to tree retention and planting requirements. And this goes back also to a lot of what we heard by the public. When we reviewed comments that were received, there were concerns about loss of tree canopy with new development. And so this is one thing that we think might be useful to look at the existing standards and see how they can be strengthened. I should add, I forgot one part. On the heels of the comprehensive plan, we are going to be updating all codes related to use and development. So primarily the zoning ordinance and the subdivision ordinance, subdivision regs, and compiling everything under single cover called Unified Development Code. So you'll see a lot of regulatory based recommendations because those are the type of things, the amendments to the zoning, for example, or subdivision regs or environmental ordinances that we're proposing be made on this next phase once we complete the actual comprehensive plan. Related to the tree protection, another recommendation is to submit a Tree City USA application, which would work quite well in concert with the identified need to evaluate the tree protection standards, because one of the requirements in applying to the Tree City USA is to make sure that there's a sound ordinance in place. And it also would end up, if it's something that comes to pass and the city is designated as such, then there would also be the appointment of a tree board made up of community members that would provide advice on plantings by the city as far as public lands. And so that might be a helpful forum for folks who have an interest in this particular issue to be engaged. And then we also propose looking at the effectiveness of minimum open space requirements in all zoning districts. There are minimum standards in most districts that say that certain parts of a property cannot be developed. And we want to look at, as part of amending and evaluating all use and development related ordinances, to see, are they truly effective? Is there a sufficient amount of open space that's being set aside, and how is it being used and maintained? Example would be also trying to incorporate the idea that there are some planned multi-use trail segments that have been identified, And there would be opportunities where a private developer could potentially integrate a portion of that trail segment in their dedicated open space. So it would be a little bit of a sort of a public-private initiative. So we want to look into that as well, as far as codifying some of that language. And then finally, we want to look at the clearing and grading standards, because currently, as far as land that is cleared and graded with development, most of the language is not mandatory. It's more of desired or permissive. And so we want to make sure that, coming back to the idea of tree protection and how a property is sensitively developed, what are the actual requirements versus just guidelines that need to be clear to an applicant. Okay, housing. So as it stands, each of the zoning districts, or all the zoning districts combined, the zoning districts, of course, identify those uses that are allowed on a property. There are a variety of housing types allowed by zoning, ranging from zoning districts that are specifically intended to accommodate apartments and other multifamily uses. Senior housing is something that also is generally allowed in most zoning districts, because we know that that too is a concern, having a different types of housing based on demographics. The property maintenance code, I wanted to point out that the state of Georgia has construction codes. Property maintenance code is not required by communities to adopt, but it has been adopted by the city. So that's something in place that when we hear concerns about code enforcement and perhaps a property that's falling by the wayside, then the city is allowed to, or can bring to bear, the requirements of the property maintenance code to help rectify those issues. Moving forward, we're recommending amending the city's architectural design standards to address residential uses. Currently in the zoning ordinance, there are a set of standards that exclude residential building types as far as requirements for building materials or exterior cladding. And so in trying to address issue of making sure that building materials, exterior materials, are durable and attractive, that it would be useful to look at expanding the scope of the current design standards to address all residential dwelling types. You'll note here it says update housing mix policy. In the 2016 plan, and in I believe a carry forward from the previous update, the 2011 plan, there was a housing mix policy identified of approximately 60% single family, I think 15% townhomes, 20% apartments, and 5% manufactured homes. It is merely a policy, but it is a guide that can be used by council in making or when they are evaluating zoning applications. And the city staff maintains a tally so that they are aware of what the current composition of all the different types of housing in the city and what a proposed development might do to change the current percentages. And so we're looking at, based on some feedback we've received by council, is enhancing the amount or increasing the amount that is single family relative to the higher density dwelling types. What can assist in really identifying what a truly appropriate mix is would be to prepare a citywide housing study that analyzes demographics, housing supply market trends, and local input to develop a projection of future residential needs. And so that's something that we're recommending to better nail down anything related to the topic of housing, because unfortunately a comprehensive plan, it is much more general in scope, And while we can talk about housing, of course, as an important element of growth and development, it's not a housing plan per se. And so anything related to that can be studied in greater detail with a dedicated study. And then finally, recommendation of expanding code enforcement, their ability to enforce things like the property maintenance code by increasing full-time personnel. Okay, economic development. The city over the past several years, since even before the 2016 comprehensive plan update, they adopted the Old Town and Commercial Gateways Tax Allocation District, or TAD, which is an alternative means of funding projects and identified, whether it's infrastructure or redevelopment projects within an identified area. They adopted in 2014 the Old Town Redevelopment Plan and have been actively implementing the plan. So any activity that you see in the Old Town area, that generally is, there's a direct line between the recommendations shown here, these concepts, between the recommendations and what is coming out of the ground. So that includes the City Hall, it includes the activity, the buildings on Main Street, the new construction, as well as additional infill housing and parks that are being implemented in the downtown area. The city has a leasing contract with a local realtor for city-owned downtown retail spaces. That's important to try to better target and recruit desired commercial uses, whether it's a certain type of restaurant or store. We heard a lot about having a desired mix of uses that would attract more people to the downtown. And so this contract being in place gives the city a little bit more ability to make sure that they're doing their best to integrate uses, commercial uses that will succeed in being an attractor to the Old Town area. The city adopted a downtown dining overlay district, which allows some outdoor dining opportunities, a little bit more flexibility there. And then they also just citywide, outside of the Old Town area or downtown, are a longstanding participant in the Gainesville Hall Economic Development Council, which is part of the Chamber of Commerce. Looking ahead, we're recommending that the Old Town Redevelopment Plan be updated. It's used to not only identify redevelopment or new development projects, but it helps with staff making decisions. If someone comes in and is wanting to propose development on an infill property or a vacant piece of land, then the type and density of the use has been recommended in the redevelopment plan. But because there's been so much activity, there needs to be an additional look at additional parcels so that it continues to be providing sound guidance for staff and for the development community and property owners moving forward to know what's appropriate to achieve this vision for the Old Town area. Also recommended is having dedicated staff to assist with promoting local initiatives and events. So that's not only for the downtown area, but also citywide as far as communications, and having someone more that's in the position to communicate that on a routine basis as part of their responsibilities. And then conducting what I'm calling an ease of doing business assessment when we're updating the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations, looking to see if there's anything that can be done to enhance or expedite development related review processes, any procedures. And then finally implementing the citywide signage project. Those graphics that you see at the bottom are a few of the design standards that have been developed This is based on a previous comp plan recommendation looking at signage for gateways to the city and to the downtown area. Community facilities and services. This is a broad topic. So this is inclusive of parks, water and sewer. One thing that it doesn't touch on is transportation. I've got that as a separate slide. But it's important to note with the development, there has been approved state loans for major sewer and water improvement projects. And the highlight here is expansion of the city's wastewater treatment plant to increase its capacity in order to serve existing and future growth. And so that project should be completed, I believe, in about 2 years. There have been stormwater improvements made by the city in the downtown area, and I believe upcoming on East Main and Lights Ferry, the new City Hall and Police Department, new Pocket Park at the roundabout at Lights Ferry and Mitchell Street. Looking ahead, the graphics here tie to the first point, constructing a farmers market pavilion park. This is all in the Old Town area. Those are the images at the top. Pine Street Park are the remaining images where an amphitheater, pavilion, and a curbless street is recommended. The curbless street, in essence, sort of facilitates pedestrian activity between Pine Street and Main Street. And then also a new park on Chestnut Street, and I'll have a visual for that on the slide coming up in a little bit. We're also recommending conducting a stormwater utility feasibility study with issues regarding drainage and stormwater management, and having the appropriate facilities in place and the ability to maintain the infrastructure. Recommending that a feasibility study be done that would address the potential for a citywide stormwater utility fee or service fee. That's something that is employed by numerous communities as an alternative funding source, a dedicated funding source to specifically address stormwater management infrastructure. And then finally, coordinating with the county on the use of development impact fees for parks and trails projects. The city collects on behalf what are called impact fees that under the category of parks and recreation, that the county the intent is that they utilize those fees to help with the construction of parks that, in addition to being available to countywide, would benefit Flowery Branch residents as well. And so moving forward, especially with oncoming trail projects I'm about to touch on, it would be great to really have the ability to tap into those funds for some of the more localized projects that are specific to Flowery Branch. Okay, transportation. This is the last one before getting into the map. The city has an annual road paving program. They participate in the regional transportation planning department called the Gainesville Hall Metropolitan Planning Organization. They've recently completed with the MPO the McEver Road intersection report. Not related to roads, there in conjunction with the MPO, there was South Hall Trail study that was developed, identifying segments in South Hall, including Flowery Branch. Codes currently require sidewalks and new development. The city reduced the speed limit on East Main Street, which would have the effect of accommodating golf carts. And then there's also along Main Street, got noted below, there's a 12-foot multi-use path that is going to be constructed, again, to facilitate movement along East Main Street to access Old Town. And there are also some multi-use trail segments being installed as conditions of zoning. This is the graphic down below, which indicates just a segment of part of the trail alignment identified in the South Hall Trail study that's being incorporated as part of a private development that ultimately the intention is it's part of a larger trail in the city's system. So looking ahead, then building off of these initiatives already been undertaken, looking at coordinating with the county to implement McKever Road roundabouts at Gaines Ferry and Radford Roads. These were the subject, these among other intersections outside of the city were the subject of this recent intersection report to address these longstanding issues at these particular intersections in the city. Also, coordinate with GDOT to evaluate signalization timing at the intersection of Atlanta Highway and Phil Necro Boulevard. But more broadly speaking, there's a need to conduct a citywide traffic improvement study instead of just looking at more of a piecemeal approach, looking at undertaking a comprehensive traffic improvement study. And that too is something that can be done in conjunction with the MPO. We're also recommending expanding the criteria for triggering a traffic impact study with development proposals. And so whether it's a rezoning, there would be greater latitude that staff would have to authorize that proposal, prepare a traffic impact study to better fully understand the implications of that particular proposal on the road system. And then, as I mentioned, construction of a trail on East Main, ultimately from Thurner Tanner Road to Flowery Branch Park. And then recommending to get into more fine-grained detail, building off of the South Hall Trail study, actually prepare a citywide bicycle and pedestrian plan. So that could look at where there are sidewalk deficiencies. It could look at bicycle amenities, etc. Okay. Now I'm going to pivot to the next half. I appreciate everyone's patience. As I said, this will all be posted so you can pore over it at your leisure. So this is the draft future development map. For those of you who know the 2016 plan, which is posted on the city's website, this is going to look familiar. We used that map as a baseline and then just have made updates to it. And I'm going to describe those. The first being a few name changes. These are the categories. So these are called character areas. So all of the colors you see represent a character area. The categories, the names themselves, we're carrying over, as I mentioned, from the 2016 plan, with the exception that mixed-use neighborhood and activity center retail are new names. Otherwise, classifications are the same, and then I'm going to show you how there's been some color changes within some of these existing categories. The first is conservation. This is really, it's just delineated by publicly owned parks and open space. So the green, in addition to City Park, technically outside the city limits to the west there, but these are represent, in addition to the pocket park at the roundabout, represent parks that I described in the previous slide that are in design phase or are being implemented. And a lot with the this character area is addressed on the slide I shared that had all of the codes that related to environmental protection. So you won't see a lot of green on this map, but that doesn't mean that that green in the way of tree canopy, that green in the way of open space isn't intended to be addressed and protected and accounted for. That will be done more so by codes versus an actual representation of green on the map. When I say no zoning districts per se here, what I'm going to do for each slide is identify zoning districts that are appropriate for and support each character area. And so wherever there's conservation as city-owned properties and as parks, there are no zoning districts per se that would apply here. But all of those ordinances that I identified on the previous slide, those apply no matter what. So if there's a sensitive natural resource that overlaps someone's property, then they have to abide by whatever rules are in place. And that will guide the use and development of the property. Suburban residential. So all of the yellow you see, and I've just sort of partitioned the map here and just have different segments that I've zoomed in on. So a lot of it is existing, and a lot of the updates to this map relate to accounting for changes in land use since 2016, as well as rezonings that have occurred since 2016. So we see more yellow than before because that more closely matches existing conditions since 2016. So suburban residential, those are your existing neighborhoods, and any area that may be identified as an emerging area, emerging neighborhood. This is the lowest density classification. The old plan said 1 to 3 units per acre. That's carried forward, and that's consistent with the minimum lot size requirements of the R1 and R2 single family zoning districts. Planned unit development, or PUD, is another zoning classification that could potentially be utilized here. But the idea is that, consistent with the suburban character, that if someone wants to have a PUD, which is it's a zoning district that gives greater flexibility in terms of the layout of a subdivision than what you can normally get under the traditional R1 and R2 zoning districts. But we're trying to make the point here that there may be an allowance for flexibility in lot sizes, or perhaps some greater density, but enhanced open space standards and design requirements would have to be met. And it's also still, strictly speaking, tied to single family dwellings that could be built in a PUD rather than a mix of uses. And so the italicized delineates those type of things that we need to be mindful of when we're updating the zoning code, which is looking at PUD requirements to make sure that the open space and site design requirements are to a high standard, and then amending the existing architectural design standards, as I mentioned on the previous slide, to address exterior materials of all residential building types.
Okay, so this is Amanda. I'm just going to chime in real quick that we're at 12:40. So if we want to allow 10 minutes for Q&A, you've got about 10 minutes more.
Perfect. And I hope everyone's having caffeine with their lunch. So anyway, all right, we're getting there, guys. Okay, traditional neighborhood and urban density community. These, I don't believe there's any change here between the 2016 map and what's shown here. It's sort of a light orange is the in-town residential, which is around your downtown core, and then urban density is are those areas that are occupied by apartments or townhomes. So this is your higher density areas, and we haven't designated any new areas for urban density community. The traditional neighborhood in and around the downtown core, that's you see a lot of infill development, whether that is new single family homes or townhouses at a slighter greater density than you would find in your suburban neighborhood areas. And then again, as I mentioned, urban density, that would be a location where in the R2 district, or perhaps a PUD, apartments would be allowed. TND is traditional neighborhood development district. That's intended to, which is in place, that is intended to implement this area. Old Town and mixed use downtown. So the Old Town are these properties in brown, and mixed use downtown are those that generally are not in the local historic district. They're on the other side of the railroad, but any development there is intended to be compatible with the development pattern and character on the other side of the railroad in Old Town. So here we have, of course, the Central Business District, the key project here with the commercial space going in on the ground floor and apartments going in above on Main Street. And then looking across the railroad from this vantage point, this would be examples of mixed use downtown where you may have existing or historically residential buildings that have the potential to be adapted for commercial use. Mixed use neighborhood, as I mentioned, was formerly just mixed use and neighborhood commercial. Anything in pink, these are significant intersections that on the 2016 map, these are a mix of either red and pink, neighborhood commercial and mixed use. We went ahead and just called the entire area just mixed use neighborhood. That would accommodate solely commercial uses, but also have the potential to reflect some of the existing or planned conditions with mixed use developments. One example here is from the farm, which is approved at the intersection of McKever and Gaines Ferry. And so again, just some image of mixed use. But down below, neighborhood commercial. These are going to be your smaller neighborhood oriented developments or uses, especially along the spine of Atlanta Highway. This is inside the city limits, and I'm just pointing it out here with the use of brick and landscaping and the lower monument sign, representative of new development that is compatible with the surrounding downtown area. And then the activity center, the 2016 map showed everything that you see in this kind of green and this blue. Oopsie. It is all shown in the current map as just activity center. Primarily commercial, but the opportunity for mixed use. What we've done is merely use 985 as a dividing line so that the east side in blue will continue just with the commercial and the commercial vein. And the same is being promoted on the other side, but there's the opportunity for mixed use with residential potentially in the form of a mixed use development. And with the new with the ability for golf carts and as a multi-use trail on East Main, looking at ways that if there are new residences that those can be additional, that downtown will be a draw, and that those folks would be able to help generate activity in the downtown. So potential for mixed use on the west side, and this is just showing an example of residential and commercial out parcels, and then the same here with commercial and residential behind. And then you all may recognize this on the east side, it's from Stonebridge Village. And then the last one, industrial employment and institutional campus. So the dark blue is has been expanded from the 2016 plan by virtue of approved rezonings that have extended some of the industrial opportunities relative to the opening of the exit 14, which makes that makes it make sense as far as properties having access, that there would be an industrial opportunity, as I said there. And then institutional campus, that's really primarily reflecting existing conditions where there are larger churches, some city-owned properties, the Falcons property and the school, that's coded as institutional campus and primarily is the same as what's in the 2016 plan. And these are just some images here. So here's the Falcons, it's more sort of a campus style development. And the emphasis here with future industrial development is looking to make sure that the city's existing guidelines have adequate standards for building materials, for landscaping, for buffers, for lighting, so that there any potential incompatibilities or with adjacent properties are minimized, so that there's also quality development all around, whether it's residential, industrial, or commercial. Okay, so moving forward, in addition to either Q&A or leaving comments, and I think Amanda's going to describe that in just a second, we're going to be finalizing the preliminary draft document through the over the next coming days. And so that should be posted online at the end of next week, prior to the April 15th public hearing. That's a requirement by the state, and another opportunity to receive any comment that we will then bear in mind, address in the plan as needed before sending it off to the Georgia Mountains Regional Commission and the state for review, which gets us to meeting the state's deadline of a June adoption of the comp plan. Amanda, so this is where it puts us with having to explain everything. I so apologize for taking so much time, but I wanted to offer some more background so that if someone is just looking at this online, there's perhaps a little bit more context while we continue to flesh out the actual full draft document. With that, let me stop. Amanda, how do we need to pivot then to open the floor to folks who may have questions?
Sure. So first of all, great job, Paige. That was a lot of content that you covered, and I think it was really valuable to hear everything you went through. So we wanted to let you all know that we are open and would definitely want your comments or questions. During this meeting, we've got about 10 minutes left. If you have a specific question or a comment, please add it to the chat function. If you would rather speak, you can let us know that too, and we can unmute you. We do know that we covered, Paige, I should say, not myself or anyone else, covered a lot of content, and we realize you may want to dig deeper into it or look at it in more detail, particularly the future development map. So as Paige alluded to, we will be posting this presentation, a larger version of the future development map, onto the project website, as well as a recording of this meeting by tomorrow, should you want to go back and listen to some of the talking points or flip through the presentation. And we also have a comment form that Monica is going to put in the chat function that you can fill out now at the end of this meeting if you have any feedback or comments, or you can also, it'll be linked on the project website as well. So Monica is also going to add in the project website there. And with that, I will stop talking so that if anybody has a question they want to ask, it looks like we have, thank you, Monica, for adding the comment form as well as the project website. Again, if you have a question and you'd rather speak, you can add that to the chat or message me directly or Paige directly, and we can unmute you. Otherwise, feel free to add any comments in the chat area. Okay, so there's a question from Charles asking, not sure if this is a correct forum, but where can I find the sidewalk golf cart path plans? And Paige or Rich, I don't know if you want to chime in.
So, okay, that is actually, I was going to add that as a graphic, and then it just, things got too crowded. So there is, trying to think, I could add that there, so there is, for the golf cart plan, if you will, there's a map that delineates those roads where it's basically it's illegal to have a golf cart, and those where it would be more appropriate. And I think with the East Main Street notion of reducing the speed limit to accommodate golf carts, that, and it's another technical name, I forget, but that would require an amendment to the plan, the golf cart plan, because I think it originally, because of the speed limit, the higher speed limit, prohibited it on East Main. So we have that as a map, and there's also a graphic that shows the prospective alignment of the trail from Thurman Tanner to Flowery Branch Park that comes from the 2014 Old Town Plan. So I can insert those before we post this, and so you can see those conceptual alignments or plans, if that answers your question.
Thanks, Paige. I think that does. So you're going to insert them into this
Yeah,
presentation, and then we'll post it when we post it on the website. Charles, you'll be able to find that there.
We'll add some more eye candy.
So we have a question from Robin asking, when is the next meeting? Will it be in person or virtual? And Paige, I think I can chime in real quick on that one so you get a breather. So this is the last public meeting for the comprehensive plan. As Paige alluded to, we'll be posting the draft of the plan document later next week. So that will be available to flip through at the project website. And then on April 15th, there will be an in-person public hearing as a part of the regular city council meeting where you're welcome to provide a comment on the draft plan, but this is the last community meeting. The next question from Martha and Alberto is, will timelines for the parks be part of the comprehensive plan?
Okay, so yes, all right, I'm sorry, not as significant detail, but in what's called the 5-year community work program, which is the short-term kind of marching orders for the city as far as the action items to be implemented and when, we'll be identifying in concert with the city what the expected years for implementation. So we'll have a 21/2022 year, and then we'll have 2023, 24, 25, 26. So generally within the next 5 years for each of these items that have been identified, including the parks, we'll have a little tick mark indicating what year the anticipated implementation of that is. And it's called the implementation program. It's kind of the last part of the document once we pull everything together.
Okay, got another question from George. Is there an overall plan for the percentage of green space that will be maintained for Flowery Branch and South Hall?
I cannot speak for South Hall. Back in the day when there was state funding, there was a green space program. There were funds for green space planning and protection. That has gone by the wayside. But if there is, I know we talked about a bike ped plan. One thing I did not mention that may be appropriate for the city to consider at the local level is its own parks and recreation plan. And that would be an opportunity to look at, and it could be expanded into a parks, recreation, green space plan. That's something that would have to be discussed, and of course, ultimately would be up to council to decide. But that would be a mechanism for doing that. Rich, you may have some other information, but I'm not aware of anything else currently out there that has any kind of documentation for green space at the local level.
No, I believe that we would reinvestigate that as we go forward with the Unified Development Code is where that would come into play.
Right, yeah, so especially, thank you, especially when we get down to, I talked about zoning districts and their open space requirement, which is open space, green space is a type of open space, then that's where we are going to be addressing the amount that is the minimum amount that is to be required in private development.
We have a question from Brett. Did you indicate a roundabout at McEver Gaines Ferry? Will that slow down throughput on McEver?
So, and I am so not a traffic engineer, but there was a committee convened with the MPO, so this again, that's the Regional Transportation Planning Body of the MPO, Oakwood, and Flowery Branch. And for those all intersections along the McEver, that cross, again, multiple jurisdictions. My understanding is that the road capacity is not so much an issue as the intersections themselves are incredibly problematic, and that this look at how those intersections are to be best addressed seems to be with roundabouts. So I don't know, there would need to be, I can look and try to find the exact, any additional details specific to that, but I think it's a little bit of, I don't know if it's early days. It's not, they're not going to be constructed right away, but from the county's best estimate in terms of their professional traffic engineering staff, they preliminarily, it seems, have identified roundabouts as being the best course of action relative to overall flow on the road. So I'm sorry, I'm just not comfortable getting into the details because I don't know the extent of the study, other than there is active study because it's understood that those are longstanding issues.
We have another question from Robin. When will the traffic study be ordered? That's one question. And then review by Tree City USA in anticipation of the astronomical residential growth in this area. Will it be made available to the residents?
So anything that we've identified, we still need to, as far as the recommended actions, we need to, in concert with staff, identify a first stab at when it's feasible within the next 5 years for these actions to happen. I think that with the Tree City USA, because we are immediately going to pivot from the comp plan to updating the city codes, that the tree related issues are going to be looked at sooner, because that just falls in line with our overall evaluation of all existing codes that relate to use and development. As far as the citywide traffic study, that would be a brand new idea that we would be identifying as occurring in the next 5 years, but would need to figure out when that may make sense. And honestly, haven't yet had that discussion with staff so that we could pinpoint a year. But your point is well taken regarding, growth and concerns about traffic. And I think that's why, beyond just looking at some of these targeted intersections, that it's a good idea to get more of a citywide study on the table. So I've made a note of your comment.
And Paige, correct me if I'm wrong, but when the draft document is posted, there will be time frame estimates in the work program. Is that correct?
Yes. And again, it's more on an annual basis. You're not going to have months or anything like that, but generally if something is, we think it can be done in a year, we'll say, 2022, or if it spans, if it's more comprehensive, maybe 2021 to 2022. But that'll be there, and we can, of course, that'll be there in the preliminary draft for everyone to see.
Okay. Well, we are a minute past 1 o'clock. It looks like we don't have any more questions in the hopper. I will note that I know some people have been coming in and out of the meeting. So we did record the meeting. It will be on the project website. And Monica, maybe you can post that again for review beginning tomorrow if you want to look back at anything or listen through the questions that were brought up, as well as the other materials. Again, please fill out the comment form after this meeting or after you've had some time to look through more things at the project website. And you can also reach us at contact us at flowerybranchcompplan.com if you have any direct questions for the planning team. And with that, Paige, do you have any additional comments or closeout items?
Just a big thank you to everyone for their time and interest. So very much appreciate it. And thank you, Amanda, and everyone for your participation.